The large space station hung silently. The dark void above the gas giant, it was a neutral place built by many species to keep the peace. Inside the main conference room, the air was cold and thick with tension. Representatives from Earth sat on one side of the long table. On the other side sat the Zarthan Empire. The Zarthans were tall and imposing, with skin like polished silver and eyes that glowed with a soft blue light. They wore armor made of crystal and steel. The humans wore simple dark suits. Everyone was waiting for the talks to begin. Jack Miller stood in the back of the room. He was not a diplomat. He was not a soldier. He was a logistics officer from the USS Dakota. His job was to make sure the supply crates arrived on time and that the data pads worked. He was quiet and unassuming. Most people looked right through him. To the important leaders, Jack was just part of the furniture. He held a clipboard in his hands and checked off items on a list. He watched the room with calm eyes. He knew that peace was fragile. One wrong word could start a war that would destroy both species. Senator Cole was the lead human diplomat. He was an older man with gray hair and a tired face. He tried to speak to the Zarthan leaders, but they were stubborn. They wanted more resources. They wanted more land. Cole tried to explain that Earth could not give everything they asked for. The Zarthan commander slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The humans flinched. The Zarthans did not move. Jack watched the commander closely. He noticed the commander was looking toward the back of the room, toward the royal box. In the royal box sat Empress Vora. She was the ruler of the Zarthan Empire. She was beautiful and terrifying. Her crown floated above her head, held in place by magnetic fields. She had not spoken yet. She watched the arguing below with a serious expression. Suddenly she coughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. Everyone stopped talking. The room went silent. Vora placed a hand on her chest. Her skin looked paler than before. The blue light in her eyes flickered. Two Zarthan doctors rushed to her side. They scanned her with small devices. Whispers filled the room. Senator Cole stood up slowly. He asked if everything was okay. The Zarthan commander growled at him to stay seated. The doctor spoke quickly to Vora in their own language. Vora nodded weakly. She stood up and walked to the front of the box. She looked down at the humans and her own people. Her voice was weak but clear. She said that the decay had returned. The human delegates did not know what decay meant. A Zarthan scientist stepped forward to explain. He said that the royal line of the Zarthan Empire was suffering from a genetic failure. Their bodies were breaking down. Only a bond with another species could stop it. The bond required a partner with high neuroplasticity. This meant a brain that could adapt quickly to new thoughts and emotions. The scientist scanned the room. He said that most species were too rigid. Their minds were too set in their ways. But humans were different. Humans were chaotic and adaptable. They were the only compatible species in the sector. Senator Cole looked worried. He asked what this meant for the treaty. The scientist said that without the bond, the Empress would die. If the Empress died, the Zarthan Empire would fall into civil war. The war would spread to human space. Millions would die. Cole asked who would be the partner. He suggested bringing a volunteer from Earth. It would take weeks for a ship to arrive. Vora shook her head. She said there was no time. She needed to bond now. Room became very quiet. The Zarthan Nobles looked at each other. They did not want their empress to bond with a human. They thought humans were weak. They thought humans were dirty. Vora looked out at the human delegation. Her eyes passed over Senator Cole. She passed over the generals. Then her eyes stopped. She looked at the back of the room. She looked at Jack Miller. Jack froze. He held his clipboard tight against his chest. He did not want to be noticed. He was just the guy who moved boxes. But Vora pointed a long finger at him. She said that she chose him. The room erupted in noise. The Zothan commander shouted that this was impossible. Senator Cole stepped forward and waved his hands. He said that Jack was just a logistics officer. He said Jack was not trained for this. He said there must be a mistake. Vora descended from the box. Her guards followed her. She walked across the floor until she stood in front of Jack. She was much taller than him. She looked down into his eyes. She asked him if he was afraid. Jack swallowed hard. His heart was beating fast. He looked at Senator Cole. Cole looked helpless. There was no protocol for this. There was no rule book for marrying an alien empress to save the galaxy. Jack looked back at Vora. He saw the pain in her eyes. He saw the weight of an empire on her shoulder. Jack thought about the USS Dakota. He thought about his friends on the ship. He thought about Laura Bennett, who was waiting for his report. If war started, they would be the first to die. Jack took a deep breath. He put his clipboard down on a nearby table. He stood up straight. He was not a hero. He was not a soldier, but he was a human. And humans did not run away when things got hard. Jack said that he would do it. He said he would try to save the peace. Senator Cole tried to stop him. He said that Jack did not understand what he was agreeing to. Vora raised her hand to silence the senator. She said that the bond must be voluntary. Force would break the connection. She looked at Jack with respect. She said that his willingness was the first sign of compatibility. The Zalthan nobles were shocked. They muttered among themselves. They could not believe a human had agreed so easily. The scientists began to prepare the chamber. The summit was over. The real test was just beginning. Jack followed the Empress out of the conference room. He walked past the Zalthan soldiers who stared at him with hatred. He walked past the human diplomats who looked at him with pity. Jack kept his head high. He did not know what was going to happen next. He did not know if he would survive the night, but he knew that he had just changed the fate of two worlds. No one expected the human to marry the alien empress, but as Jack walked down the cold metal hallway beside her, he knew there was no turning back. The galaxy was watching, and Jack Miller was ready to face whatever came next. The shuttle landed softly on the platform of the Zalthan capital world. Jack Miller looked out the window. City below was made of tall spires of blue crystal and silver steel. It looked beautiful but cold. There were no trees and no grass. Everything was hard and sharp. The shuttle doors opened. Jack stepped out onto the metal floor. The air was thin and smelled like ozone. Empress Vora waited for him. She wore a long robe of white silk. Her guards stood in a line. They did not smile. Jack walked toward Vora. He felt very small compared to the giant buildings around them. Vora led him to the Imperial Palace. It was a massive structure that floated above the ground. Magnets held it in place. Jack walked through halls that were silent. His footsteps echoed loudly. He was taken to his quarters. The room was large and filled with strange furniture. There was a bed made of soft gel. There was a window that looked out over the city, but the window was locked. Jack could not open it. Jack sat on the edge of the bed. He was alone. The guard stood outside his door. He was not allowed to leave without permission. He was not allowed to speak to anyone without permission. He felt like a prisoner. Days passed. Jack spent his time walking around the room. He counted the tiles on the floor. He studied the patterns on the wall. He missed his ship. He missed the USS Dakota. He missed his friends. On the fifth day, a small data pad appeared on his table. It was not from the Zarthans. It was hidden inside a box of food. Jack picked it up. It hummed softly. A voice spoke from it. It was Laura Bennett. Her voice was quiet and fast. She said she had hacked the Palace network. She warned Jack that he was in danger. She said there were factions in the court that wanted him dead. They believed a human consort made the Empire weak. Laura said the USS Dakota was ready to extract him if he gave the signal. Jack listened carefully. He knew Laura was brave. She risked her career to send this message. Jack thought about leaving. He could go back to safety. He could go back to moving crates, but he thought about Vora. He thought about the peace treaty. If he left, the war would start. Jack turned off the data pad. He hid it under his mattress. He would not leave yet. The next morning, Jack was taken to the Korthal. The room was huge. Hundreds of Zarthan nobles stood in rows. They wore colorful armor. Their eyes glowed. In the dim light, Empress Vora sat on a high throne. Jack was told to stand beside her. He had to stand still for hours. The Zarthans did not move. Jack felt his legs ache. His back hurt. Air was hot. Some nobles tried to make him fail. They whispered loud insults. They dropped things near his feet to make him jump. Jack did not move. He stared straight ahead. He thought about standing watch on the dock back on Earth. This was just like that, only harder. After 4 hours, the ceremony ended. Jack was allowed to sit. Vora looked at him. She seemed impressed. She said few humans could stand that long. Jack just nodded. He was tired. He wanted water. Later that day, Jack asked to see the palace kitchens. The guards were confused. They did not understand why a consort would want to see the cooks, but Vora allowed it. Jack walked into the kitchen. It was chaotic. Servants were running around. Crates of food were stacked everywhere. Some crates were open. Food was spoiling on the counters. The air smelled bad. Jack saw a servant trying to lift a heavy box. The box fell. Fruit rolled across the floor. The servant looked scared. He thought Jack would be angry. Jack did not get angry. He picked up the fruit. He looked at the storage system. It was a mess. There was no order, no labels, no schedule. Jack knew this work. This was logistics. This was what he did best. He called the head cook over. The cook was a large Zarthan with 4 arms. He looked down at Jack. Jack pointed to the crates. He said they needed a system. He said fresh food should be in the front, old food should be in the back. He showed them how to stack the boxes so they would not fall. He drew chart on a piece of paper. The cook looked at the chart. He looked at Jack. The cook nodded. He told the servants to follow Jack's plan. For the next week, Jack worked in the kitchens. He did not wear his royal robes. He wore simple work clothes. He helped carry boxes. He organized the supply lines. The servants were surprised. They were used to nobles who only gave orders. Jack gave orders, but he also worked. The food waste went down. The servants got their breaks on time. The meals served to the court were better. The servants began to like Jack. They smiled. When he walked by, they bowed with respect. Word spread through the palace. The human was useful. The human was kind. In the shadows of the hall, high priest Kale watched. Kale was a traditionalist. He wore black armor. He hated the human. He saw the servants smiling at Jack. He saw the head cook defending Jack. Kale knew this was dangerous. If the lower castes loved the human, Kale could not easily remove him. Kale touched the hilt of his weapon. He decided that accidents needed to happen. Jack was making friends. Kale needed to make enemies. Back on Earth, Senator Cole was having a hard time. The government wanted to pull Jack out. They said it was too risky. Cole argued that Jack was the key to peace. Cole received a message from Jack. It was short. It said, "I am staying. The treaty is holding. Do not come for me." Cole read the message twice. He sighed. He knew Jack was stubborn. Cole showed the message to the council. They were not happy, but they could not force Jack to leave. Cole looked out the window at the sky. He hoped Jack knew what he was doing. Jack was far away. He was surrounded by aliens who might kill him. But Jack did not feel afraid. He felt useful. He stood in the palace garden. The plants were made of glass. They did not grow. Jack missed real trees. He missed the smell of dirt. Vora found him. There she stood beside him. She asked if he was lonely. Jack said yes. He said he missed his home. Vora said she was lonely too. Being empress was hard. People only wanted things from her. Jack looked at her. He realized she was just a person. She had a heavy burden. Jack said they would figure it out together. Vora smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Jack knew he had made the right choice. He was not just a prisoner. He was becoming part of this world, but he also knew someone was watching him. He felt eyes on his back. He turned around. The garden was empty. But Jack knew better. In a place like this, nothing was ever truly empty. He tightened his hands into fists. He was ready for whatever came next. The great hall was filled with light. Crystals hung from the high ceiling. They reflected the glow of the lamps. Music played softly. It was a slow song. The engagement banquet had begun. Hundreds of Zarthan nobles were there. They stood in rows around the long table. Jack Miller sat at the head of the table. He sat next to Empress Vora. He wore a formal suit. It was dark blue. It fit him well. Vora wore a gown of silver thread. She looked like a star, but Jack knew the danger. He felt eyes on him. Many eyes were angry. High Priest Cal stood near the throne. He watched Jack with cold eyes. Cal had lost power since Jack organized the kitchens. Servants liked Jack now. Cal did not like that. He wanted Jack to fail. He wanted Jack to die. The ceremony reached the toast. This was the most important part. A servant brought a tray of wine. The wine was red and thick. It was a special drink for the royal bond. Cal walked forward. He held the main bottle. He poured the wine into 2 glasses, one for Vora, one for Jack. The room went silent. Everyone watched. The air felt heavy. Jack looked at the glass. He did not pick it up. He leaned closer. He smelled the liquid. His nose twitched. Something was wrong. It smelled like bitter almonds. It smelled like chemicals. Jack remembered his His grandfather worked on it. Farm, he taught Jack about pesticides. He taught Jack to smell danger. This wine smelled like poison. It was not normal wine. Jack knew it would kill him. Humans could not handle Zarthan toxins. But if Vora drank it too, the bond might kill her as well. Jack had to act fast. He could not shout. That would cause a panic. Jack looked at Vora. He tapped his wrist twice. It was a signal. They had practiced. It meant danger. Stop. Vora saw the signal. She froze. Her hand was near the glass. She did not lift it. Kale frowned. He said the toast must be done. He said it was tradition. His voice was sharp. He wanted them to drink. Vora looked at Kale. Her eyes were hard. She said, wait. She called for the royal doctors. The nobles whispered. The sound was like wind in the trees. Kale looked nervous. He stepped back. His hand moved near his robe. The doctors ran forward. They used scanners on the wine. The machines beeped loudly. The sound echoed in the hall. Red lights flashed on the devices. The head doctor looked at Vora. He said, the wine was poisoned. It was a slow toxin. It was made for humans, but it would hurt the Empress through the bond. The room erupted. Guards moved fast. They surrounded Kale. Kale shouted that it was a lie. He said the human was trying to trick them. He said Jack was a spy. Jack stood up. He spoke clearly. His voice was calm. He said he knew the smell. He said humans learned to smell danger to survive. He said he would not let harm come to the Empress. The nobles looked at Jack. They saw he was not weak. He was alert. He was brave. Kale was dragged away. He struggled. He screamed threats, but no one listened. The guards took him to the dungeons. The banquet was over. The nobles left. Quickly, they were scared. They talked about the human. They said he saved the Empress. They said humans were sharp. They said human instincts were useful. Jack stood alone with Vora. The hall was empty now. The lights were dimmed. Vora looked at Jack. She was shaking slightly. She said he saved her life. Jack said he just did his job. He said someone had to check the supplies. Vora laughed. It was a soft sound. She said he was more than a logistics officer. She said he was a partner. Jack looked at the spilled wine on the table. It was dark like blood. He felt tired. He knew Kale had friends. This was not the end. There would be more attempts, but tonight they won. Vora took Jack's hand. Her skin was cool. His was warm. She said the bond was stronger now. Jack agreed. He looked at the doors. He knew Laura Bennett would be happy to hear this. He would send her a message later. For now, he stood with the Empress. They were safe for tonight. The human had passed the test. The galaxy was watching. And the human did not fail. Jack thought about the USS Dakota. He thought about Senator Cole. They would hear about this. Soon the story would spread. Humans were not just workers. They were protectors. Jack squeezed Vora's hand. She squeezed back. They walked out of the hall together. The guards saluted them. This time the salute was real. It was not just for the Empress. It was for the human too. Jack Miller walked with his head high. He was ready for the next challenge. The poison was gone, but the war for peace was just starting, and Jack was ready to fight it with his mind. High Priest Kale was gone, but his friends were still everywhere. The Empire faced a new problem. The outer colonies were hungry. The food ships were empty. The soil on many worlds was dead and gray. The Zarthan military council met in the war room. It was a dark room with maps on the walls. General Thor was the leader of the military. He was big and angry. He wore heavy armor. He wanted to attack a nearby planet. He said they should take the food by force. He said strength was the only language others understood. Empress Vora sat at the head of the table. She looked tired. The stress of the poison attempt was still on her face. Jack Miller stood behind her. He listened to the plan. It was a bad plan. War would bring more death. It would not fix the soil. It would only create more enemies. Jack stepped forward. Generals growled. They did not like a human speaking in their war room. Jack said violence was not the answer. He said there was another way. General Thor laughed. He said humans were weak. They did not know war. They were too soft. Jack said he knew about growing things. He said Earth had been hungry before humans learned to fix the land. They learned to make dead soil live. Again, he proposed a plan. He wanted to use human farming techniques on the barren colonies. He wanted to use trade instead of theft. The council shook their heads. They thought farming was for slaves. Nobles did not work the land. Nobles commanded. Vora looked at Jack. She trusted him. She had seen his mind work in the kitchens. She had seen his bravery at the banquet. She gave him permission to try, but she said he had one season. If it failed, the military would attack. Jack nodded. He accepted the challenge. Jack traveled to Colony 4. It was a dusty place. The wind blew hard. The ground was hard and gray. Nothing grew there. The laborers were Zarthans from the lower caste. They wore rough clothes. Their skin was dull. They looked at Jack with doubt. They saw a human in royal clothes. They thought he would just give orders. They thought he would leave when the work got hard. Jack took off his royal coat. He put on work boots. He picked up a shovel. Laborers were surprised. Jack started to dig. The ground was tough. His hands blistered. He did not stop. He showed them how to turn the soil. He brought seeds from earth. They were small and hardy. They were designed to grow in bad conditions. He taught them how to water the plants. He used simple machines. Zarthans had advanced technology, but they did not use it for dirt. They used lasers and force fields. Jack used plows and hoses. He fixed the water pumps. He made sure the sun hit the fields. He worked from morning until night. His back hurt. His clothes got dirty, but he did not stop. The laborers watched him. Slowly, they picked up their own tools. They started to help. A week later, Empress Vora arrived. She came in a small ship. The laborers bowed. They expected her to leave. They expected her to stay in her clean shuttle. Instead, Vora took off her crown. She put on a pair of gloves. She joined Jack in the field. The laborers watched with wide eyes. Their empress was working in the dirt. This had never happened before in the history of the empire. News spread across the empire. People saw the images on their screens. The empress and the human were planting seeds together. The laborers felt proud. They worked harder. They wanted to help their ruler. The mood on the colony changed. It was no longer a prison. It was a home. General Thor watched the feeds from his ship. He was angry. He said this was undignified. But the people loved it. The people saw that their leaders cared. Months passed. The gray ground turned green. Small shoots appeared, then leaves, then food. The crops grew faster than anyone expected. The human seeds were strong. The human methods worked. The colony produced a surplus. There was enough Food for everyone, there was even extra. To send to the capital, General Tor came. To see the results, he walked through. The fields, he looked at the tall plants, he looked at the happy workers. He could not argue with the truth. The military plan was cancelled. There would be no war. Jack stood with Vora. They watched the harvesters collect the food. Jack wiped sweat from his forehead. He smiled. Vora looked at him with love. She said he saved the empire again. Jack said they did it together, he said. Humans were good at fixing things. Human ship arrived in orbit. It was the USS Dakota. Senator Cole came down to the surface. He walked through the field. He saw humans and Zarthans working side by side. He saw the food crates being loaded. Cole shook Jack's hand. He said Earth was proud, he said. The alliance was secure. The Zarthan Council signed the new treaty. It was based on trade and help, not fear and force. The perception of humanity changed. They were not weaklings. They were builders. They were survivors. The Zarthans realized that strength was not just about weapons. It was about life. It was about growth. Jack looked at the sky. The stars looked brighter. He knew the hard part was over. The wedding was next, but this moment was important. It proved that humans belonged here. Jack Miller was just a logistics officer, but he built a future. He looked at Vora. She nodded. They were ready for the next step. The galaxy was changing, and humans were leading the way. The laborers cheered as the first shipment left the planet. It was not going to a war zone. It was going to a hungry city. Jack felt a sense of peace. He had used his skills to save lives. That was better than any victory in battle. Sun set over the green fields. It was a beautiful sight. For the first time in centuries, Colony 4 was alive. The day of the wedding arrived. The grand hall of the Crystal Palace was filled with people. Every seat was taken. Thousands of Zarthan nobles wore their best armor. Hundreds of human delegates wore their formal suits. Cameras floated in the air. They recorded everything. The event was broadcast across both human and Zarthan space. Billions of people watched on their screens. The air smelled like flowers and ozone. Light poured through the high windows. It made the crystal walls shine. Jack Miller stood at the front of the room. He wore a uniform that blended human and Zarthan styles. It was dark blue with silver trim. He looked calm. He was not shaking. He was ready. Empress Vora walked down the aisle. She wore a gown of white light. It seemed to glow around her. Her crown floated above her head. She looked at Jack. Her eyes were full of warmth. The music stopped. They stood face to face. The high priest who replaced Kale stepped forward. He was kinder than Kale. He spoke the old words. He asked if they joined willingly. Jack said yes. Vora said yes. Their voices were clear. They exchanged vows. Jack spoke human promises. He promised to stand by her in hard times. He promised to honor her. Vora spoke Zarthan blood oaths. She promised to share her strength. She promised to protect him. It was a mix of two cultures. It was new. It was powerful. When the vows were done, they signed the treaty. This was not just a marriage. It was a political union. It created the Terran-Zarthan alliance. Senator Cole stood nearby. He watched with pride. He had worried so much. Now he saw the result. The document was sealed with human ink and Zarthan light. The crowd cheered. The sound was loud. It shook the floor. Jack turned to the audience. He had to give a speech. He Walked to the microphone, he looked at the humans, he looked at the Zarthans. He took a deep breath. Jack said that strength was not just about power, he said many people thought humans were weak, he said many people thought Zarthans were cold, he said they were wrong. He said strength was about the willingness to understand others, he said peace was harder than war, war was easy, anyone could fight, peace required work, it required listening, it required sharing food and resources. He said this alliance was not about one species ruling the other, it was about partners. He said humans brought adaptability. Zarthans brought stability, together. They were stronger, the crowd listened. Some nobles looked down, they remembered their old ways, but most people clapped. They wanted peace, they were tired of fighting. High above the planet, the USS Dakota waited in orbit. Laura Bennett watched the feed on the bridge screen. The crew cheered when Jack finished his speech. Laura smiled. She remembered when Jack was just moving crates. Now he was a consort. He was a leader. She sent a message to the palace. It said, "Congratulations." She knew Jack would read it later. Human fleet powered up their engines. It was a show of support. They were not there to fight. They were there to protect the peace. The Zarthan fleet did the same. The two fleets floated side by side. It was a sight no one thought they would see. The enemies were now allies. The celebration lasted for days. There was music and food. Humans and Zarthans ate together. They danced together. Barriers were breaking down. Jack and Vora walked through the crowds. They greeted everyone. Jack shook hands. Vora bowed to the workers, the servants who Jack had helped in the kitchen smiled. The brightest, they brought him a special cake. It was made from the crops grown on Colony 4. Jack ate a piece. It tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. He looked at Vora. She looked happy. Stress was gone from her face. The genetic decay was stable. The bond was working. They were healthy. They were together. Years passed. The galaxy changed. Wars decreased significantly. The diplomatic framework Jack helped build became the standard. Disputes were solved at tables, not on battlefields. Trade routes opened up. Human ships traveled deep into Zarthan space. Zarthan ships visited Earth. Children learned about both species in school. The fear was gone. Jack and Vora grew older. Their hair turned gray, but their bond remained strong. They stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The city was thriving. New parks had been built. Real trees grew alongside the crystal spires. The air was cleaner. The people were happier. Jack leaned on the railing. He looked at the sky. The stars twinkled in the dark. Vora stood beside him. She rested her hand on his arm. She asked if he missed Earth. Jack thought about it. He said he missed the ocean. He missed the rain. But he said this was his home now. Vora said he had changed everything. Jack shook his head. He said they changed it together. He said he was just a logistics officer. He said he only fixed what was broken. Vora smiled. She said that was exactly what the galaxy needed, someone to fix what was broken. They looked out over the lights of the city. Each light was a life. Each life was safe because of the alliance. No one expected the human to marry the alien empress. When Jack was chosen, people thought it was a mistake. They thought it would fail. They thought it would end in tragedy, but it did not. It was the best thing that could have happened. Jack Miller proved that humanity belonged among the stars, not as servants, not as conquerors, but as partners. The story of their union was told in schools. It was a legend. It reminded people that even small choices could change the fate of worlds. Jack squeezed Vora's hand. She squeezed back. They stood in silence. The galaxy was quiet. The war was over. The future was bright, and Jack Miller was ready for whatever came next.